Our next amazing session, we have Jason Paddock here with us on the virtual stage from Opportune. Jason, it's great to see you today. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. I'd love for you to talk to us a bit about Opportune and your role there.
Yeah, definitely. So I have the pleasure of running our marketing data and technology team here at Opportune. And so we're a group of marketing technologists that go ahead and serve the marketing department to be able to achieve all of their goals and objectives. And then Opportune as a whole is driven by a mission to provide inclusive, affordable financial services that empower our members to build a better future. So we have been certified as a Community Development Financial Institution, or CDFI, for over 10 years. Our members are among the millions of hardworking Americans who are shut out of the financial mainstream because they face financial health challenges or lack a credit score or have traditional credit scores that do not properly reflect their credit worthiness. So we use proprietary technology and risk modeling to score the unscorable and provide individuals with responsible and affordable financial services that allow them to demonstrate their credit worthiness and establish the credit history required to access new opportunities. We also seek to provide our members with effortless, automated digital banking products and services that help them save, bank, and invest. And then we serve our members online through our Digit app, over the phone, or in person at hundreds of retail locations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Will you speak to us a bit about how you work with Telium?
Yeah, definitely. So we really utilize Telium to manage our first-party data. And so this includes collecting, normalizing, and distributing that data to third parties such as Google and Facebook in real time.
Awesome. Okay. So the team identified a need for help with the customer data, bringing it together. What were some of those key challenges that really kind of bubbled up to the surface for the team to know, all right, we need to optimize the tech stack here, take some steps to help improve the situation?
Yeah, great question. So Telium was actually purchased before I had joined Opportune. However, my understanding at the time, this was around mid-2019, Opportune was starting that shift towards digital and doing the digital transformation. That was the good buzzword back then. And so what we needed was a solution to be able to manage our first-party data. There wasn't a lot of emphasis on our website at the time, and they were utilizing Google Tag Manager, and it was painful for that team to manage that. And then what we ultimately wanted to understand was all lifecycle touch points for a user so that we could better measure the success of our different marketing campaigns. So we started off originally just doing the traditional direct mail, sending out pre-offers to individuals. And then we wanted to go ahead and move that to online so we can do online digital channels. And then so what we wanted to be able to do with that is have the visibility of what our offline members were doing that interacted with telesales or our retail store locations and their online interactions.
Fantastic. So what are some of the things now that the team can do that you couldn't do before? What are some of those key roadblocks that have been removed so the team can really be freed up to be innovative?
Yeah, so let me get into a little bit of specific. So I had joined in Opportune in January of 2020. And at that time, we could identify 58% of our active members to their online identity. And this is blended across all of their offline channels and online. And so with that 58%, what was actually pretty interesting was that our online only channel was actually at 98% of those that we could identify. And I'll get into a little bit of details of why that would be. But ultimately, what we wanted to do was increase our match rate. And so we needed to ensure that we were encouraging all of our users that were offline to come online. And then we also needed to keep our internal identifiers as sticky as possible. So here are a few of the solutions that we did to implement that in no particular order. We implemented Iterable as our email service provider. And then that allowed us to start sending marketing and servicing type messages with calls to action that point back to our website. So that allowed us to identify a user's email address to their Telium visitor ID. And so we were able to get that identification to happen that way. For our offline channels, such as telesales and the retail store locations, let's say a user was going to apply for a loan. Some of the times you have to provide document verification. And so what we would do is we would actually send the member a text message or an email with a link that was specific for them that would allow them to go ahead and upload those documents using their own device. So again, we're able to take that internal identifier that we know that who that person is and their Telium visitor ID, tie that together. In addition, what we did was we didn't want Telium to look like it was a third-party asset, right? The world is getting rid of third-party data. And so we went ahead and did the process of CNAMing Tealium. So now it looks like a first-party asset. So instead of referencing tags.tiqcdn.com, now it's just tags.opportune.com. And so that will make it so the browsers inherently will trust the data more and allow us to persist information. And then kind of lastly, what we did was we wanted to make sure that these internal identifiers were sticky, and we exposed them into the data layer throughout the rest of that user session. Because let's be real, we're dealing with the internet, we're dealing with mobile devices on mobile internet connections, and they can go out. And so it's very likely that every now and then you're going to lose an event here and there. And so we wanted to ensure that when we had our Tealium visitor ID and an internal identifier, that we didn't just happen to lose one event and then we weren't able to identify that user. So we wanted to make it so that was sticky, so that no matter what, we would always be able to go ahead and identify those individuals.
Talk about internet going out. I don't know if you all can hear the thunder and see the lightning flashing. I'm like, no, stay on. I know there's a crazy story about a Facebook change when Facebook was moving to iOS. Tell us about that.
Yeah, definitely. So when the implementation and adoption of iOS 14.5, we definitely saw a major impact into the performance stats that we were given to us from our ad vendors, such as Facebook, but it also applied to Google as well. And when we looked into it, basically with that adoption, within a short period of time, our cost to acquire a member increased and our conversion numbers decreased. And we started doing a lot of troubleshooting internally and with our Facebook rep. And we were seeing things that, we were utilizing Tealium's event stream to be able to send a lot of our conversion events server side to Facebook. And so Tealium was able to show us how many events they were sending, if there were any errors. And so I forget the exact numbers, but let's say it was something like 30,000 events were going to Facebook. And on the Facebook dashboard, we were only seeing, I think it was like 18,000 or 20,000, something along those lines. And so really working with the Facebook team to figure out, how could this be if we're not getting any errors? And so what we determined is that this was all caused because of the processes that Facebook implemented to handle the changes with iOS. And so basically that is that if an iOS user is using the Facebook app, Instagram, WhatsApp, any Facebook property, basically, and they get that ATT pop-up that says do not track, Facebook will say any events or conversions that come for that user, they will drop. They won't error it, but they will just drop it and make it so there's no visibility. And so that had a pretty big impact on our business because it raised a lot of concerns. And the initial response was to decrease or pause spending. And that's because it's imperative that we understand the effectiveness of our campaigns. And the built-in reporting from these vendors was no longer working. So what we did was we went ahead and shifted to utilize our first-party data that we collect via Tealium's data access to build our own attribution models so that we could understand the effectiveness of our campaigns across all channels. So this switch not only solved our third-party marketing campaign reporting issues, and we were able to see how effective Facebook and Google and such actually were, much more than they were saying, but we're also able to add additional attribution windows and build a fractional attribution model to understand how multiple campaigns across multiple channels work together to convert a user to a member. And then I would also like to,
go ahead.
Oh yeah, thanks. And the other thing I like to add too, so when we made all those different changes of implementing the email platform, the CNAMing, those internal identifiers, using the self-service links for our members to go ahead and identify their devices. What's nice is that we started at that 58% match rate. We're now in the 90 to 92% match rate range. And our online is now at 100%, which is what we would expect since it's all online. And so this really helps us to understand how our users interact with all of our online channels. And then this data is we're able to utilize to adjust our different marketing campaigns, since now we can really see the effectiveness of all of them and how they all work together. It could also be utilized to figure out the layout of our pages and different personalization options that we might want to try.
Those are some great examples. The Facebook example is a crazy one. All too familiar, I know, for the audience. We've all dealt with challenges like that. Have to be nimble and able to pivot quickly to solve those problems. Let's move away from problems and talk about successes. What are some of the successes that Opportune is most excited about? What are some of those use cases that really helped move the needle?
let's see here. So I think the thing about that would be, I would say, is that we wanted to really look into what it is that these browsers are doing, what is it they're doing with data, so we can make sure that we're always able to kind of stay on top of it and understand what we're utilizing. And so with that, I would say that, we like browsers will continue to find ways to remove the ability to identify anonymous users. And so a common trick today is a combination of a user agent and IP address to, let's say, create a fingerprint. But Apple has really announced that they do not like fingerprints, and they're doing everything they can to stop it. And so a couple of things that they're doing is that they're stopping to update the user agents, so they'll stay static going forward. And then I think if you're on the iCloud Plus, you can actually utilize a relay service to tunnel all of your internet traffic through Apple's system's IP. And then what that does is it makes it so you can't actually see what the end user's actual IP is. So this effectively removes the ability to do fingerprinting. And so we have to be able to kind of fall within the rules of what these different vendors are requiring, browser vendors in this case. And then another thing that they're doing too, Apple is doing, is that they've announced that they're following DNS requests to see if the domain that you're using as a to CNAME. So in this example, when we CNAME Tealium to be tags at opportune.com, if they see that it CNAMEs to a third party, Apple will continue to treat that domain as a third party, meaning that you won't be able to have your cookies that will live for greater than 24 hours. And so that's a real problem for us as well, because what we had the issue with was our users don't come to our site every day, maybe once or twice a month. And so we needed a way that really persists that. And so we were able to utilize another service from Cloudflare. They have a process called CNAME flattening. And basically what that does is it allows your device to make the request for the IP for the domain. And then Cloudflare server side will go ahead and resolve the DNS, go through all the CNAME hops, and then return back the actual A records that were there. And so from a browser perspective, it is a complete first party asset, and there is no way for them to know that you're actually hosting it someplace else. And so that really allowed us to get kind of that 100% match rate online. And then allowed us to really drive more direction, because now that we have all this data and understanding our users and seeing everything from end to end, that allows us to really utilize Tealium's data layer enrichment. So this is where you're able to pull down that visitor profile from the cloud and then be able to then run further personalization options from there. And so that's one of the big things that we're looking forward to in the future now, is really focusing a lot more on how do we go ahead and personalize our pages to make it so that our users have less clicks, they can get to the information that they're looking for, and kind of hide a lot of the noise, right? So really being able to provide more directed content to that user.
We've got a question from the audience. Sherry wants to know, how does the Tealium Visitor ID work cross-channel?
Yeah, so what we do with that actually is we really would try and expose it across a lot of our different channels. So for example, we're utilizing Iterable. So we will pass from Tealium, we will share to Iterable what our Tealium Visitor ID is. And so we will be able to include that visitor ID across different messaging if we want to. In typical though, the Tealium visitor ID, we typically will have lots of different visitor IDs associated to a specific member, because they're going to have multiple devices and things along those lines. And so we have our own internal models that helps us to identify and stitch. So while we do use some of Tealium's visitor stitching, since there isn't a way to unstitch a user, we went ahead and do those models internally, and then we can utilize our internal data with it to help us better match our users. And so we can have a really high, nice match rate of who all these individuals are. And for a given internal, like let's say our client ID, we're able to see all the different browsers, device IDs that were associated with that. And then with that, we're able to then take a further step back and understand holistically everything and all touch points that that person did. With that too, we also provide a lot of inputs from third-party systems back into Tealium as well. So we're not just tracking web events, but for example, our Iterable, we're going to get all of our SMS, we're going to get our emails, all those events that come in through that way. We also have a triggered direct mail process as well, so we can send physical mail, and we get all those type of analytic events that come back as well, and those all get tied back into in this case it's the email address, but then the email address is directly associated to the visitor ID. So while it may not be that the visitor ID itself passes all the way around, we are using other pieces of data that ties back to that visitor ID, and so we can just go with one visitor ID and we can understand kind of everything that happens to that user.
Awesome, thank you so much, Sherry. I'm sure that answered your question above and beyond. Jason, looking into the future, what's next? What are you excited about? What are the teams working on? what's on the roadmap?
Yeah, definitely. So I think right now there's a few things that we're doing. One is we're doing the shift to GA4. We're trying to build ourselves a global report suite. We can go ahead and utilize the more metrics that we can get with that, and just kind of see how does that tie into other things that we're doing internally with our data. In addition to that, we're also working heavily on our native mobile app, and so we're going to figure out all the different types of ways to do different types of tracking and things like that, especially around iOS and all of their new restrictions that are in place. And so really being able to dig deep into that and figuring out, okay, how do we provide this best user experience while still being able to best understand how these users are working. So those are the two kind of big initiatives coming up here this year.
All right. So, kind of knowing what you know today, with your extensive background in the space, with all of the best practices and learnings you have for the folks in our audience today, what advice would you give to those who are, looking to take their customer data strategy to the next level, or perhaps even looking to implement a CDP?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing for you to understand is that your first party data is an extremely valuable asset. So you must capture it in a normalized and clean way so that you can use it to take action. Now, it's really important, and I want to repeat it again. You must capture, normalize, and clean your data in a way that you can use it to take action. I'm sure you've heard this term many times before. Garbage in is garbage out. You need to make sure that your data is clean and in a way that means something. And so you want to make sure that each of these events that you're tracking, that they all are being done in a consistent way. So that way all of your downstream systems are able to utilize them and you can scale these programs. As for, how does a CDP or Tealium help us be innovative? I think it's the Tealium's visitor profile is huge for us. And that's really the ability to save users' information server side, so that even if a user does clear their cache and cookies, we can immediately pull back all that information back to the browser as soon as that user identifies themselves on the site. And so that really just gives us so much capabilities that we can continually learn about that user and continue to shift them around and then provide them that best experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight, Jason. Jason, this conversation has been thank you so much for joining us today, DB 2022 for financial services, to share some of your best practices and experiences. It's been a pleasure to have you, and we have so much value in our partnership with Opportune. So again, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Have a great day.